And we have Brittney here, the co-founder of the AI Objectives Institute, with her colleague. I knew how to pronounce your name. Is it Deger?
It's Deger, like
There, you see, anyway, I had learned that. I'm so glad that you're with us online and that Brittney's here. And again, AI Objectives Institute was founded to find ways that AI can be addressing different issues around inclusion, social harmony, cohesion, all kinds of things. And so there's a number of examples that they have already under their belt. And I'm excited to hear, Brittney, what you're going to share with us today.
Mute. I swear I hit mute. Okay. All right. All right. We are on. We are seeing the right thing. I am not seeing the right thing. So give me a second. Okay. It is muted. Okay. It was every time I swear it's muted. I'm going to blame Zoom because I classically love to blame Zoom for all of my presenting problems. So I'm Brittney. This is Talk to the City, a case study we did in Michigan. So what is Talk to the City? Talk to the City is an open source language model for improving collective deliberation and decision making. And what is important here is it analyzes detailed qualitative data. And then it aggregates those responses and arranges similar claims into topics and subtopics. And we started this work in May of last year around the discourse in AI safety and AI ethics. So many of you may not be familiar, but there is quite the fight between these two fields that continues to happen. And we thought, well, it would be really cool if we could visualize this discourse. And so we scraped Twitter and put a visualization together. And then we were thinking, what's next? I was coming off maternity leave, and I was thinking, great, what people think about AI is great, but like, what else could we do with this? And I kept going back to this exhibit at the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. So I don't know if anyone else has seen this exhibit, but it's very visceral. You go, you pick up a phone, and you talk to someone who's incarcerated, and you hear their story. And it still brings a emotional response to me every time I talk about it. And so obviously, Talk to the City is not going to be some amazing activist art like the Equal Justice Initiative created. But it got me thinking, video is powerful. Talking to people or seeing people tell you their story is really impactful. And also, we hear a lot about the bad of AI, and especially for underrepresented communities. But could we maybe use this to uplift an underrepresented community? And so around this time, as serendipity works, we met Shawana Vaughn of Silent Cry. And Silent Cry is an organization that helps formerly incarcerated individuals and their families reintegrate back into society. And many of these people have been incarcerated for over 10 years. So there's a big change in society. When they come back, they need mental health services, obviously being in prison. And then returning to society is a very different and large culture shock for many of them. And so in talking to Shawana, she was really excited. And she's like, I have a lot of people who want to share their story and want to talk to you about this. So she introduced me, or before I get there, so our goal, right? So is creating really a collective source of truth for this community. Can we give Silent Cry something that they could use, that they could share, and that could have impact? Can we represent their priorities correctly? Another important factor, has everyone consented? Do they understand what consent means? And can we hear from people, in their own voice? And so Shawana introduced me to 12 people, most of which were formerly incarcerated. Others were family members thereof. And I spent personally 10 hours interviewing all of them. So there's a few things. I mentioned consent before, making sure it's very easy for everyone to understand, oh, my name and video will be online. But it's like, yes, but a transcript of this is going to be fed into a language model that is owned by a private company for now. We were using GPT-4. Your name isn't, but getting people who aren't necessarily familiar with what ChatGPT is at the time, familiar with that. So we spent quite a bit of effort making sure they understood. All of them were super excited to do it. And then for me as the interviewer, as someone without the lived experience, right? But making sure I was compassionate. I talked a lot to Shawana about, how do I approach this and how do I approach these interviews in a way that makes sure that there's compassion, and I have a background in journalism too. So I'm covered things like Occupy Wall Street, and I'm used to interviewing lots of people from different backgrounds, but I just wanted to really be cognizant of this group. And so naturally, as you expect, there were issues. Turns out scraping Twitter is easy. Video transcripts that are long are hard. Who would have thought? So we came into some interesting problems. Like there was a lot of duplicate topics. So depending on the interview, some people would refer to themselves as formerly incarcerated, and other people would refer to themselves as a returning citizen. And so it would create categories that were like challenges for formerly incarcerated, and then challenges for returning citizen. And I'm like, these are the same thing. Like, but it didn't, understand that. And then on top of that challenge, we had, how do we present this information in a way that's clear, that's easy to understand, that anyone could look at and like figure out how to use. And then, this has come up before, but, the use of insensitive language. So very early version, in fact, the earliest used the term in a category of ex-convict. Now, anyone who's worked with justice-involved individuals knows that that is like not a good word. That is a very bad word. And this was not, the C word was not mentioned anywhere in the interview. The model came up with it themselves, right? And there's been recent papers showing that a lot of these models tend to have some inherent racism behind them. There's Google it, lots of papers if you want to deep dive into it. But again, we as an organization, we're still thinking like, yes, but like, could we still do something to uplift this community despite that? So let's see how, oh no, me and Zoom again. So now I'll show you a demo. I'm out of Zoom now, so I can't use that excuse. So this is the output of the report. So all of this is model generated. So a language model came up with this. There's about 500 claims total. The claims, again, are from the model based on quotes from the interview. And as you can see, reentry challenges is something that came up a lot. And if we click here, we can see there's 6 different subtopics within reentry challenges. And I'm going to highlight one from Technology Gap from Lionel, which returning citizens may feel alienated and overwhelmed by the technological changes that have occurred in society. And hopefully everyone on Zoom can hear this. Oh, wait, but you guys can't.
His blue. She said his blue.
Okay, which is the right way to do this? Okay.
I'm riding. I'm thinking.
Well, that's more. Okay. Oh.
I could hear it.
About this, man, they got devices where you ain't even got to touch the phone, and that stayed on my mind all the time. Then when I did,
so for those of you in here that didn't hear that, Lionel's describing a story where he returns, like he's getting picked up from being in prison for 20 plus years. And he drives by a bus stop with his mom, and there's this guy just like talking to himself. And he's like, this guy's crazy. What's going on? And his mom's like, he's on his Bluetooth. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? Because he had no concept that this existed. Now, different prisons work differently. There's different access to technology depending, but he had literally no idea, right? And you can imagine if you actually just sit and think about it, if you went into prison in 1994 and you're coming out 20 years later, like you're in a whole new world. Job applications all online. What is this online thing? Like I didn't have this experience. So we're trying to show and illustrate that, you can hear Lionel like tell the story that's like kind of funny, but also like sad, right? At the same time, like it's this conflicting feeling. And it really, again, is like, we got to do something about this. And technology in particular seems like something that could be easily addressable. Another thing, that as the person doing the interviews, right, I had a sense of like, oh, this is what's going to be most important and this is not. And I was sort of right, but sort of wrong. I would have gotten to technology as like the thing, but obviously employment barriers was something we spent more time talking about. So there's an interesting thing you can think about too of the journalistic bias that I had as the person doing the interview. So I also really cared about success stories because there were a few people all of them actually, who I talked to, like, despite everything, like, are doing amazing things. Most of them doing the work to help people who are now returning to society, working at organizations like on the ground, advocacy groups. And I really wanted to show some of those success stories. And, one of the individuals, he did after school programs. He wanted to be the person he needed when he was a kid. And so I think there's just hearing these stories are incredibly powerful. So I'm gonna include one more, because mental health support, and we've heard that, in other parts of the conversation today, is another, I think, really, really heavy, heavy topic. So, oh, that's not the one. So let's hear from Angela. Okay, wait. Oh. And there's so many of them. I'm glad I was making eye contact with you. Sorry about that, everyone online. I was saying that Angela was talking about her experience with mental health and like returning back into society, and how there was really just no support for her, and there was no one to talk to, but she still had her mom. She had someone who was there for her, and how she works with so many people who have no one. There's a teenage lifer rule in Michigan that they're working on expunging, but teenagers get life in prison. And one example was a young man who murdered his mother's abuser when he was 13, and he came out of prison when he was 30 to nothing and nobody. And having left the world at 13, right? And it's like, how can you not, like, I'm gonna cry. I'm just retelling the story, right? Like, so I think, what we're hoping, to do here is to tell these people's stories, and to give Shawana and people at Silent Cry an artifact that they can then go to lawmakers with and say, like, look, listen to this person. And like, you can visit this anytime. It exists. It continues to exist. So one other thing, so that's the demo portion. But one other thing that was really important that we did that I want to like highlight is the model came up with these 500 claims. I then walked through all 500 with every single participant to make sure that they were like, yes, this is right, or no, like, this is crazy. Most of the time it was, yes, this is right. The original error rate was about 5%. And those errors were like all over the gambit. Some were in the wrong category. Others were, I don't work at this organization anymore, so I don't want to be like affiliated with it publicly. Others were like, this is missing nuance, and others were, this is wrong. And so the ones that we ended up that weren't fixable was about 3%, under 3%. So, I mean, that's pretty good, but it did take us a while to get here. So I don't want to like gloss over. We went through many, many iterations until I was like, I feel good enough. Like, as the person, I feel like this accurately represents this community. And they all felt that way as well. And so there'll be a lot more detail on the nitty gritty, how the pipeline works for those who are curious. I will not spend more time on that. But I think the best thing I can do to leave it with is a quote from Shawana that Talk to the City's Heal Michigan report is where advocacy meets legislation to create change. And then this is a very long quote from Cozine, who was wonderful. I like want to be friends with Cozine, and who was one of the participants in the event. And if anyone knows who Lewis Hamilton is, he's like the American Lewis Hamilton. So I'm just like, be my friend. So anyway, I'm going to now turn it over to Deger for the what's next portion.
Thank you, Brittney. So I would like to talk a little bit about where we want to go with what we have built so far. One of the things that has come across as quite critical for us to be able to scale the benefits that tools like Talk to the City can give is making it incredibly easy to use for everyone. So currently, with the current stack as it exists, Talk to the City can sit on top of a Google survey, or on top of a Polis survey, or over a range of different video URLs that you upload. Our goal is basically to be able to give the ability to be represented to every community, to be able to have them present a shared source of truth, an artifact, the URL basically that they all can point at. And also this to be not static, but continuously growing as new input is coming. I do see as the AI revolution is taking place and the communities that are most in need are actually falling behind on the transformation. So our goal is to make sure we can bring this to as many folks as possible. We are building an integration with WhatsApp, so it should be as easy as, like, our goal is for any community to be able to run collective intelligence with next to no effort. You don't need to have an engineer, you don't need a deployment. If you can run a Google survey, you can talk to the city. If you can make a WhatsApp thread, you can invite talk to the city to the WhatsApp thread, and it will run the same instance. So our goal is to make the elicitation process of new data sources as easy as possible and not reinvent the wheel. And if you have already a text data set that you would like to plug, it is basically would take about 15 minutes. The second piece on what's next is looking into different kinds of deliberative processes. There's decision-making oriented processes, and then there is creating shared collective sources of truth, which is actually quite relevant on peacemaking aspect. I would like to do a very quick screen share to show some different ways in which the same flow could work. For example, we are working with the VA, which is a veterans nurses union in San Francisco, and for them to figure out what are their top priorities for improving working conditions and be able to negotiate for this union, we run an instance of Talk to the City, open-ended questions rather than multiple choice questions, so that people can suggest, well, these are the critical issues for me, and to be able to go to the specifics of what people said. In this case, there is no video because all of this was done on a text survey. Another example was this sitting on top of a citizens' assembly in Taiwan. Going back to some of the examples Matt was pointing at, Taiwan has already started integrating this in some of their flows. Most of the data is in Chinese, but I just want to show quickly what are different aspects of AI policy that Taiwan should be prioritizing and adapting. So there was a common theme of, there should be a Taiwanese AI model that actually works with traditional rather than simplified Chinese was very critical, for example. So we can basically work across languages using language models to translate these. So our core goal is to be able to make sure this is easy to use for everyone and approaches different kinds of deliberation that is decision-oriented. One thing we found quite valuable is using multiple language models that can then correct each other to be able to refine, to be able to help with deduplication, or one language model to tell another, by the way, using ex-convict won't be preferred by this community because these people will not refer to themselves as such. And the last step is to make this fully open source. Currently, we can work on this with OpenAI's models or Claude from Anthropic, but we can also work with open source models. So our goal is for the models to be able to be community owned so that each of these communities have full ownership and stewardship over what they create. It is free to use. We're happy to help you set up an instance. And if you already have data, it would actually be very easy to try out what the AI representations would look like. So if you're interested, please reach out to us. Brittney will be around to chat. I wish I was able to show up in person as well. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Deger and Brittney. A quick round of applause before we move to questions here. As we see, like the technologist with the interviewer and a focus on trying to enhance agency towards constructive deliberation, it's really it's enormous what you're building together. Let's see what kind of questions we have from the audience or anyone online. Okay. Yeah. Well, let me ask a question to Deger. The idea that, I mean, we've got a lot of people who have needs for monitoring and measuring impact, looking at a few of you in the audience here. And the idea that you could sort of ask questions to lots of people, almost even in an automated way, and then use this tool to be able to learn, but still capture their verbatim, qualitative, distinctive voice, right? Is that another use case? Have you tried something like that?
Absolutely. A large scale survey on ground is, I think, one of the most, like straightforward directions to go. It doesn't really have to be around a specific already existing decision process. I'm seeing someone ask for my contact. I just messaged it there. Brittney also will be around for folks that are in person. But yeah, the goal is how can we enable an experiment with these different use cases and flows as well? Because we're a nonprofit and we don't charge different users. Our goal is to see as many different instances. For example, with Taiwan, the very first experiment we did actually built on top of a prior data collection that they already had. So they weren't collecting more data, but it was around informing the Uber and taxi policy. That is interesting, but it's actually a completed debate. And it took us about 10 minutes to wire that and show, okay, this is what the AI-driven representations look like. And on top of that, we now have a data set with 540K tokens, which is massive. It's one of the largest data sets they have gone through in their deliberative processes. So we can easily scale up past this point. And our goal is how can we have more humans to be able to use this so that they don't have to spend resources on collecting data through, you know, more manual processes that would slower. Yeah.
Right, and let's take a question here in the room. Microphone anywhere?
Thank you very much. How are you communicating? I really liked how you talked about informing people about their consent and that process. That was a very interpersonal experience you had. How about people who are coming from, you know, the outside world? They're interested in using Talk to the City. How do you communicate where their data is going, how it will be used, how it will be stored, data governance practices, all of that? Whether you feel it's really relevant to this or not, you know, how does that exchange go with the user?
Okay, I can take that. So I think it's really dependent on the situation. A lot of it is anonymous. Some of the stuff that comes through is actually just anonymous, so it doesn't matter as much. And everyone so far we've worked with, we have been kind of involved in some capacity with. So we have talked them through the process and explained that as we're just kind of getting ready to launch it a little bit more broadly. We would have like a README or something that was very clear about how your data is used and where it's going. And if you are uploading anything to the internet with video, referencing video, like you're on the internet with your name attached to it, if you so chose to, right? And this particular use case was very specific for us to test like how well the model did. Oops. And it was a is it me again? That's how I feel about you, Zoom. It looks like it was me. It did it itself. You all saw my hands. Yeah, it's just me and Zoom, man. There's a battle. And it's winning. So anyways, being really clear. And again, Deger had mentioned, right now we're using GPT-4. So OpenAI is getting your stuff, or Anthropic, either one. But if in this instance, none of their names were uploaded. It was just the transcripts. So just being really clear. And as we expand this more broadly, like having a README that says like where your data is going and this is what's happening. And it's, that's kind of the best I think we can do. It's tough, like until we could have our own model that, Deger alluded to, but that's pretty tough. But again, like OpenAI doesn't know that, Clarence said this thing. It just knows like this was a massive transcript from someone probably in Michigan.
Right. I want to add and answer it from a different direction with respect to expectation setting. So if we're working with a union, the union is already collecting this data. So there is, explicit communication on what they need. But also our tool is open source, which means anyone can just download it and run it without even talking to us, right? Which means it is really important to have them realize if you are using a model that is, for example, OpenAI's, then the data is in OpenAI's hands. I think it's super important for us to do this, be able to do this with open source models too. So you can say the data belongs to us, and this is not for the external world to be able to benefit from. Currently, this is possible with Talk to the City. You can also wire an open source model and do the cluster. So you can pick what model you would like to use. Currently, OpenAI's models perform best. So if people are okay with that, I recommend that. But I do think these will change also as people are developing more and more models. So